Hey everyone, and welcome. So if you're getting ready for that big Life in the UK test, then you have come to the right place. In this explainer, we're going to take a journey right through the Industrial Revolution and the Victorian era, a time of, smoke, steam, and just massive, massive change that really forged the United Kingdom that we all live in today.
So, here's our game plan. Think of it as a roadmap for your revision. First up, we'll look at how it all started, that spark of invention that created a whole new industrial Britain. Then, we'll see how that spark turned into a fire that fueled a global empire. After that, we'll dive into the huge social shifts of the Victorian era, check out the fight for political reform, and then, and this is super important, we'll wrap it all up with a quick review of the essential facts you have to know for the test. Okay, let's jump right in. I want you to imagine a Britain that's mostly fields and farms, pretty rural. Now, picture that whole landscape just transforming. Suddenly it's all factories and cities popping up everywhere. This incredible change didn't just happen out of nowhere. Nope. It was kicked off by a handful of revolutionary ideas that, and I'm not exaggerating here, literally reshaped the entire world. So, the first big idea you need to get your head around is mechanization. What is it? Well, for centuries, pretty much everything was made by hand, usually in small cottages. Mechanization completely flipped that script. It was all about bringing in machines to do the heavy lifting. And this one change had a massive knock-on effect. It moved work out of homes and into these big centralized buildings we know as factories. And that, of course, meant things could be made way faster, way more efficiently, and it just totally redefined what work and daily life even look like for millions of people.
Okay, so you've got these amazing new machines, but what's making them go? The answer, and this is maybe the biggest piece of the puzzle, is the steam engine. This was the absolute game changer. Seriously, before steam power, if you wanted to build a factory, you had to be near a fast-flowing river for power. You were literally tied to the geography. But the steam engine, it completely broke that chain. All of a sudden, you could build a factory pretty much anywhere you could get coal. And that led to this explosive growth of brand new industrial cities.
So you take that mechanization we talked about, you add in the power of the steam engine, and what do you get? You get our third huge concept, mass production. And this is exactly what it sounds like. Factories could now just churn out massive quantities of identical goods. We're talking on a scale that nobody had ever imagined before. And this whole industrial powerhouse was really built on a few key industries, right? You needed coal to fuel the engines, you needed iron and steel to build the machines and the train tracks, and of course, you needed the railways themselves. They were like the new iron arteries, connecting the entire country.
Okay, here's a big tip for your test. It's not enough to know the big ideas, you've got to connect them to key people. And if you need one name to remember for this year's Spirit of Innovation, it's Richard Arkwright. But here's the thing, he wasn't just some guy who invented a new gadget. He was an organizer, a systems builder.
So why should you care about Arkwright? What made him so important? Well, it wasn't just one single invention. Yeah, he improved machines, like the carding machine for getting cotton fibers ready. But his real genius, his real breakthrough, was creating the system. He's the guy who pioneered the first steam-powered factories. He figured out how to organize armies of workers and rows of machines with, let's be honest, pretty ruthless efficiency. And that factory model he created, that became the blueprint for the entire Industrial Revolution.
All right, so Britain's got this incredible industrial engine roaring away. But a boom this big, well, it couldn't be contained just on one island. So next, let's look at how all this innovation became the engine for a massive global expansion.
What you end up with is this really powerful cycle, kind of like a feedback loop. Think about it. British factories are absolutely starving for raw materials, cotton, rubber, you name it. And at the same time, they need new places, new markets to sell all the stuff they're making. Well, this massive demand is what drove imperial expansion. And then, the colonies would provide those raw materials and the new markets, which in turn just fueled even more industrial growth back in Britain. See? A cycle.
Okay, let's talk about the era this all happens in, the Victorian era. It's named, of course, for Queen Victoria, one of Britain's longest reigning monarchs. She was on the throne from 1837 all the way to 1901. But it's so important to remember that this wasn't just a story of progress and imperial glory, far from it. Alongside all that was massive social upheaval, incredible hardship for many, and a growing chorus of voices demanding reform.
Okay, pay close attention here, because this is a super important distinction and something that comes up on the test all the time. You absolutely have to know the difference between these two dates. So in 1807, Britain made the slave trade illegal.
That's the buying and selling of people. But, and this is the key part, that didn't free the people who were already enslaved. That took another 26 years, until the Emancipation Act was passed in 1833. That's the act that finally freed enslaved people across most of the British Empire. 2 separate steps, 2 crucial dates.
Now, we have to talk about another defining event of this period, and it's a real tragedy, the Irish potato famine. It was exactly what it sounds like, a catastrophic failure of the potato crop, which was the main source of food for millions. It led to unimaginable starvation and had absolutely devastating, long-lasting consequences, not just for Ireland, but for Britain as well.
The human cost, it's just staggering. It's estimated that around 1 million people died. 1 million people, dead from starvation and disease. It's almost impossible to comprehend.
And that's not all. At the very same time, another 1.5 million people had no choice but to leave their homes and emigrate just to have a chance at survival. This massive wave of migration meant many Irish people moved to the big industrial cities in Britain, places like Liverpool, Glasgow. And that influx completely changed the culture and the makeup of those cities forever.
But even in the middle of all this hardship, something else was growing. A powerful spirit of reform. People started to push back. You have incredible figures like Florence Nightingale, who basically invented modern nursing during the Crimean War. New laws were finally passed to put limits on the absolutely brutal working hours forced on women and children in factories. And you had big economic changes too, like getting rid of the corn laws, which was a huge deal because it helped lower the price of food and promote free trade.
So, you've got this country that's changing at lightning speed, right? Economically, socially, it's a completely different place. It was only a matter of time before people started to look at the political system and say, hey, this needs to change too. Ordinary people started demanding a say in how the country was actually run. Now, this didn't happen all at once. It was a step-by-step process. The first huge leap forward was the Great Reform Act of 1832. This was massive. It got rid of a bunch of these so-called rotten boroughs, which were basically ghost constituencies with hardly any voters that were super easy for wealthy landowners to control. And crucially, it gave seats in Parliament to the new booming industrial cities like Manchester and Birmingham. A bit later, the 1867 Act went even further and gave the vote to many working-class men in the cities. But, and it's a big but, there was a massive group of people still left out in the cold: women.
And that brings us to the women's suffrage movement. The fight for women to get the vote was an incredibly long, hard-fought battle. It was led by these fiercely determined campaigners who became known as the suffragettes, and one of the most famous and important leaders you need to know is Emmeline Pankhurst.
The suffragettes realized that polite requests weren't working, so to make their voices heard, they adopted brand new, much more forceful tactics. They started engaging in civil disobedience, which means they deliberately broke laws they saw as unjust. And when they were arrested and thrown in prison, many of them went on dangerous hunger strikes. They were absolutely determined that the political establishment could not ignore them any longer.
Okay, and here is another one of those crucial two-step processes you need to lock in for the test. Just like with the abolition of slavery, this victory didn't happen all at once. The first big breakthrough came in 1918, when some women, those over the age of 30 who met certain conditions, were finally given the right to vote. But full equality? That didn't arrive for another 10 years. It was in 1928 that the voting age for women was finally lowered to 21, putting them on an equal footing with men. Phew, okay, we have covered a ton of ground. So before we wrap up, let's pull everything together into one final, super focused review. Think of this next part as your ultimate cheat sheet for the exam. All right, this is it. This brings it all home. Honestly, the real key to passing the test is being able to make these quick, direct connections. So when your brain sees Richard Arkwright, it should immediately fire back factory system. You see the date 1807, you think prohibition of the slave trade. You see 1833, you think emancipation of slaves. It's all about mastering these specific pairings: the name, the date, the event. If you can do that, you're going to be in great shape. So as you finish up your studying, I just want to leave you with one final thought. All of this stuff we've talked about, it isn't just dead and gone history. The debates about industry and the environment, the complicated legacy of empire, the ongoing fight for social justice, and for everyone's political rights to be heard, these are the very foundations of the UK today. So understanding this period really is understanding modern Britain. Good luck with your test. You've got this.